Welcome to the Collective Genius Podcast, the show for real estate investors who are looking to scale.
Welcome back to the CG Podcast, the Collective Genius Podcast. My name is Leon Barnes, and I am your host, as always, at least until I have further notice, I guess. Today, I have another Collective Genius member I'm excited to share with you. This is the podcast, and I've gotten some great feedback this week, especially for real estate investors out there that are listening to these journeys that entrepreneurs are on. We've got another great one here for you today. I'd like to welcome in Mr. Casey Gregersen. Welcome into the show, Casey.
Absolutely, Leon. Excited to be here.
Good, man. This has been, you're one of those that started in one level, has graduated to the next level, and there's such a good story here that I want to make sure that we share with everyone. So why don't we do this? Why don't we start with where you operate from and where you operate at, because there's a little bit of a story there. So tell people where you operate and what you do specifically.
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm sitting here today in Houston, Texas. I've been here. I was brought down here, which I'll tell later in the story, due to oil and gas. But I grew up in Wyoming, so I'll probably be, I know you'll say this, Leon, but I'll probably be the only guest up in Wyoming investing up there, which is a good thing. I like it that way. But more and more people are coming. So all my markets up there. I also do the surrounding states around Wyoming. But yeah, literally I could pick up and move up there today, but I love being down here because I worked in oil and gas for a long time, and I worked with a lot of people. A lot of my limited partners and lenders are oil and gas folks, and I just love the city, so love being down here.
What is it that you do in Wyoming and surrounding states?
You bet. So it's been a mix of from single family all the way up to multifamily. It obviously didn't start with large multifamily, but today I would say our bread and butter is direct to seller, right? We negotiate. We structure a lot of our deals creatively, but at the end of the day, I think maybe what separates me is every lead I get, I want to try to monetize every lead I have, right? If that's me taking it down as a fix and flip, or if it's a great value add, right? We love those. But some of the ones I've been more excited about in the last couple of years have been these large multifamily value adds, and we've been taking those down as well.
Okay. And most of this in Wyoming, but what are the other states that you also service?
Yep. The first kind of natural one to go up to was Montana. I actually did my undergrad up in Montana, and my wife's from there. That was the first kind of market to jump into. We jumped into Billings, Montana, which has been one of my favorite markets. And then, we've recently branched into South Dakota and a little bit of Nebraska, Colorado, basically every state that's touching Wyoming, all the way to Utah and Idaho. We're doing some marketing in all those states, really just because we got the boots on the ground that's close by.
The border states of your main market. I love it. You're looking at all opportunities, not just leads, but also border states, which, to that point, you made it a little bit earlier, close that loop. When I'm looking at applications, and I've been doing this for 7 years plus now, when I look at applicants, the amount of applicants that come in with Wyoming, Montana, or the Dakotas on it are very light. In fact, I may have only seen in this seat 2 applications from Wyoming, you being one of them. In my time here, a couple from the Dakotas, maybe 1 or 2 from Montana. So I want to get into your full story, but I don't want to gloss over that. I'd love to close that loop of why it is that you feel like you're successful in those areas where I don't see a lot of. I mean, maybe I'm lost, maybe I'm not seeing it, but you seem to have a pretty good hold on, especially your home state where you market the most, which is Wyoming.
Yeah, I mean, I used to say it was a double-edged sword, right? Cuts both ways. You got little competition, which is great. Like when for example, we do I'll just pull out one of our little postcards, right? We do these handwritten postcards sometimes. When I send these, right, I'm the only one sending them. Like, so we hear stories of people like, if I was doing this in Houston and I walk up to my home seller, they've probably got a stack of these, right? But when in Wyoming, I'm the only one sending direct mail. Some of these people are like, how did you get mine? Like, they're blown away that I even knew their address and sent them a postcard with a picture of their house on it, right? So low competition, which allows us to be that much more competitive. But I used to say that was potentially a disadvantage on the dispo side, right? Because now if I want to just be a pure wholesaler, there's less investors like me. But we've kind of flipped that around to where now I do my fund, I have my capital fund, right? Bighorn Capital Fund, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But that's been kind of the bridge to help me to be like, okay, the retail market is still really strong because there's still a lot of people moving out here. I mean, all the surrounding states I just mentioned around Wyoming, they've all grown and rapidly expanded. And like, for example, like the Front Range above Denver, Salt Lake City, even like a lot of Montana has now become very overpriced. And now Wyoming has all those kind of same scenery, same like outdoor benefits, right? But you don't have the taxes, right? Wyoming, when I compare Wyoming to Texas, it's dramatic. So low taxes, low insurance. And yeah, and price points are still kind of like the Midwest. It's not, I mean, there are parts of Wyoming that have gone up, but they're still like, I can still find 1% rule deals. And I'm in a market that's appreciating. So that's why I like it. Low competition. And yeah, we've kind of figured out the dispo part too.
As someone that invests in an area that, from a standpoint of people moving there, I invest in Kansas. Wyoming is very similar from that standpoint, as maybe you don't have a bunch of population, increase like you see here where we're at in Tampa or Austin in Texas. But what I do love about the state is if you're driving on I-80 across I-80 and you look over at the mountains, there's no difference between Wyoming and Colorado. Until you get to Denver, it's all plains anyway, right? And you look in Wyoming, other than the wind, Wyoming's pretty windy, but it's a beautiful, beautiful state. If I enjoyed cold weather, I would consider moving it there myself.
Yeah. And we have no state income tax and the low property taxes, because most people are like, wait, you can't have both. You got to have one or the other. How does the state afford or have a budget? But it's a low population, and combined with all the oil and gas and the minerals, and it's just a very that's what's driven the state economy, right, for years and off royalties to where they haven't needed it. And it's good to know. Great atmosphere for investors, right? Whether people are wanting we have a lot of people that move to retire there because they just want the low income or no income tax, right? And then, and then also business wise, it's very pro business.
So I do want to get to later as we go from where you started to where you are today. I do want to dive in a little bit more as you've grown beyond single family into multifamily, because that is a question that comes up often, as you know, within the Collective Genius and people that apply here. It's, hey, I've been investing in single family for many years, and now I want to get to the next level. So I do want to talk about that at the end, but I don't want to go back. The success of this podcast so far, at least from the feedback that I've gotten, and what people really love is that journey, the journey of an entrepreneur that just happens to operate in the real estate investing space. And you're no different. You're somebody that started in one industry and made your way into real estate. But I want to go back even farther than that. I want to go back to when you were a kid, when you're thinking about a career path. I think most kids, they figure it out anywhere between the 8th grade and high school, 7th grade or high school, of this is what I want to be. For Casey, what was that?
Yeah, you'll get a kick out of this one, Leon. I grew up in Wyoming. We don't have any professional sports teams, so we have one 4-year university. So I grew up listening to the Wyoming Cowboys games on football or basketball, right? But they were hardly ever on TV growing up, so it was on the radio, right? So one of my idols was Dave Walsh, the voice of the Cowboys. So my childhood dream was to be a radio announcer, some sort of sportscaster. And I literally actually rode that all the way into college and I started out as my undergrad in communications, which it changed later, but that was what I wanted to do.
Well, we share that. I was a broadcast journalism major. That's what I wanted to do. I was like, okay, if I can't play in the NBA, which is my first goal, if I can't play in the NBA, I want to be around sports. And so my degree is in communications with an emphasis in broadcast journalism for that very reason. I enjoyed radio, enjoyed listening to play-by-play. Didn't know how I was going to do it, but very early on, I knew I wanted to do something along those lines. And as a quick follow-up, when you're growing up in Wyoming, I mean, obviously the college, that's what a lot of people maybe not, they don't know. If you live in a college area where there's only college teams, those are your pro sports teams. Like I think of the University of Alabama, they don't have sports teams, right? Or professional sports teams. Alabama is their professional sports team. But if you did have, like in football and basketball, were you Denver fans?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Big Broncos and Nuggets and all those. Yeah. Rockies. It was a rough life. It's always been a rough life being a Rockies fan, but it was our closest team.
Yeah, but not so much on the Nuggets and Broncos.
The rest of them, yeah.
At least you've got championships on both sides.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. So at what point did you know, all right, that's not for me? Communications, I'm going to go in a different profession.
Yeah. I mean, luckily I had enough good mentors and parents, and because I was always good at math. I was always a math guy, right? So it always came easy to you. I always excelled in it, and I did enjoy it. So I was my first year up at Rocky Mountain College in Billings, and I was up there playing football and doing communications. And I was like, they're like, why don't you take a math class? So I went and did that, and I just did calculus and just kept doing math and kept doing those classes. And eventually I realized, I don't know what point it finally clicked, but I'm like, I was better than most of my peers in college and passing these classes fairly, not easily, but it came a lot easier to me than it did to other people. So eventually I pivoted to chemistry, and I was a chemistry major, but then I realized I was there for football, and unlike all the other guys that are just there to play football, I'm like, I'm going to use the most of my time here. And I redshirted. So I was there for 5 years. So I ended up getting a double major in math and chemistry because there's a lot of crossover. And then I had to take some physics stuff to get there. So I got a minor in physics, and then I liked Spanish, and I just kind of kept that going out of high school. So I had a double major in math and chemistry, minor in physics and Spanish, which sounds awesome, but like, what are you going to do with that?
You papered up for sure.
Yeah.
You got all the paper. Do you speak Spanish?
Yeah. You know what? I kept the momentum going, and now I haven't been using as much lately, but I can't.
Okay, so you did at one point
Yes.
have, speak fluent Spanish.
Yes. Not as sharp anymore.
Yeah, I really feel like, if you're not using it on a daily basis or at least a weekly basis, and it's not your native tongue, I feel like you lose it unless you're just in a culture or in a neighborhood where you're speaking it all the time.
Yeah, 100%.
I could be wrong about that, but that's just my own personal experience that, when I was semi-fluent, or at least understanding, being around it, I'd speak more of it. But so you got all this paper, you've pivoted, and you're one of the few, probably on your team, college, true athlete, right? Academic athlete. You got all this paper. As you graduate, then what?
Yeah. So fortunately I was trying to figure that out. And I do still, I remember it's my now wife, right? We were like watching a movie, and they were talking about careers, and I'm like, I still can't even see what I'm going to be doing. So fortunately, like
graduated.
Yeah.
And you're still like, I have no clue.
Yeah. It was probably my senior year, and I'm still just trying to figure this out, of college. And I know I'm going to have a major in math and chemistry, but I'm trying to figure out what this looks like. They're like, okay, you could go to pharmacy school, or I could do be a math teacher, or some of these different things. But luckily, like, I enjoyed math, and people kept mentioning engineering. So what I did is my advisor said, he's like, go apply for engineering school. So I applied for chemical engineering, and I did it at several other, I remember I applied at like some high level, like Caltech and some of these really high level ones in California. And she's like, yeah, you could do that, Casey, but you probably don't have the resume. But I did. But luckily I applied it up in Montana, and then the other one was Wyoming. I always wanted to still go down to Wyoming. I didn't go there for undergrad, and I grew up obviously loving the University of Wyoming, loving those games, but never went there because I just had an opportunity to play in Montana. I wish I could have been Josh Allen 6'5" and played quarterback there, but ended up playing at a smaller school in Montana. But anyway, so the cool story is like I get accepted into the school at Wyoming, and the cool thing is like an assistantship where they're going to pay for your grad school and you get like a stipend. And I originally got accepted, but I didn't get it, the one I wanted. And I had gone down there and interviewed. And I remember calling my advisor. His name was Dr. Alvarado. And I ended up following up with him like, hey, I'm still interested. And they're like, oh, well, we thought you only wanted chemical. We didn't realize you wanted petroleum. We have an opening in the petroleum program. I'm like, yeah, I'll do petroleum. Like, just get me into grad school. I want just to get a degree where I can move on. So I ended up getting accepted into that program to do a master's in petroleum engineering at Wyoming. And I found out, yeah, I mean, petroleum was at that time, oil and gas was hot, and it was a much better degree.
Yeah. So oil and gas in Wyoming, and I mean, other than Wyoming, there's two states that I think about with oil and gas, and that's Texas and Oklahoma. So after you graduate, is this when you make the move to Houston?
Yep. Yeah. So I was fortunate enough. I got an internship down in Houston for the summer and came down here, loved it. And with Shell as an intern, and they hire, obviously, most of their people, they hire their interns. So I was able to get a full-time gig down here. And we moved down here in 2012, full-time working for Shell, and making way more money than any of my peers. It was crazy at the time because there was such a demand for petroleum engineers. That's why I mentioned it's not the most diverse. It's definitely not a good diverse degree, right? Which I found over the years, it's a very volatile industry, but when times are good, they pay well.
Sure. So wasn't the plan, but this is where you end up. It's 2012. Your first few years, are you going up the corporate ranks? What's going on with that career?
Okay, so I'm up in Wyoming and going to school. My first year of school, my roommate decides, he's like, hey, his dad owned the house, and he's like, Casey, why doesn't he buy the property? You're going to be here for a couple more years, and your brother's going to come to school. He can do what my dad did. I'm like, okay, let me go ask my dad. And I went and asked my dad, and he's like, yeah, Casey, I'm interested, but why don't you buy the house? Why don't you do it? I'll be your co-signer. So my dad we went down to US Bank, got a loan, and bought my first rental property while I was going to school at UW. Again, not thinking like a real estate investor at all at the time. Sure. I was just thinking, hey, my roommates are going to pay my rent. How cool would that be?
Right.
Yeah. So we do that one, right? And when I had I wasn't making a whole lot of money in college, but at least I had my stipend, and now my living was covered. So I had a little bit extra money. And when I moved out, now I was able to put in another roommate because we were basically doing this whole co-living model back then, just in a college town where you just rented out the room, right? So when I moved out, I could rent out one more room and had more cash flow. But to answer your question, when I got down to Houston, I wasn't even thinking about real estate. I was just like working, to your point. It was working up the corporate ladder. Actually, my dream was when I went to this global company like Shell, I was hearing about all my peers who had came in and they got through their training. So Shell has a really, really rigorous training program, but it's like super, in the industry, it was very high sought after. And if you got through that training, it was like your ticket to go anywhere in the world with Shell. And at that time, oil and gas was doing well. Shell was like doing projects all around the world. And my goal is to be an expat because like it would like double your salary. It was like all these cool benefits and you get to go live somewhere else in the world. So that was my goal. And early it was like, I'm going to get through this training as fast as I can and have an opportunity to hopefully go do an expat assignment.
What was the time frame for that? I mean, it's 2012. How long would it take to get to that type of program where you're living overseas?
Yeah, it was, for most people, it was like a 3 to 4 year program. But mine, I just accelerated. I just jumped on it. It took me about 2 years by the time I kind of went through. It was 2 to 3 years before I did it. And you had to go to do your field assignment. But I kind of jumped through and accelerated all of them. But the problem was, by the time I went through it, that's when oil started dipping. And then all of a sudden, all these assignments kind of stopped happening. And we were just fortunate to have jobs.
That doesn't happen. But at some point, the seed that was planted in grad school starts to germinate, right? It starts to take off. 2012 to 2015, that 3-year time frame that you're accelerating. Now, when does real estate come back into play?
Yes, absolutely. It's a fun story because a lot of people will resonate with it. It was Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? It was reading books. But what was different about me and what I think was a cool, call it a superpower, or a cool like situation I was in, was when I was working out in the field. So let me back up a little bit. So when you go to a big oil company or like Shell, they send you out to the field to work as an engineer, but you like get to actually supervise I was supervising a drilling rig or out on a frac spread. And we would actually it was really fun. We got to be like the guy at night. Like we were making the decisions, right? It was really fun. They gave us a really cool leadership opportunity. So we would work the night shift and we would get that training, right? So they would make us all go out there as engineers for about a year. And most of the other engineering guys were like, some liked it, but most of them were like, get me out like as fast as they could. It was a box they checked so they could get back to the office and go move up the ladder. But what I found was when I was in the field, I only worked half of the year, right? So I'd be 2 weeks on the rig and then 2 weeks off. And so on that 2 weeks off, I could do whatever I wanted. I didn't have to check a cell phone or log into my laptop. I literally had no responsibility, right? So that combined, which I'll get into like how I started fixing and flipping on the side, but more what the click was I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and like I had that first property, and that's when I realized, wow, that property, it's not just a little bit of cash flow coming every month. That's an asset. I'm using leverage, right? And then everything started to click, and I started reading more and more. But what I was going to say is the cool opportunity I had was while we're in the field, we have what we call windshield time, right? You're driving between location, and there's all this time that you're just hanging out in the car, listening or doing nothing, right? And early on, it was me listening to sports radio or listening to music, but I'm like, I should make more of this time, right? This could be an opportunity. So I started listening to all these podcasts and listening to Bigger Pockets. I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and that's kind of where I started to educate myself. And then the cool thing was I could educate myself for 2 weeks out on the rig, basically working my W-2. And then I was able to go start applying that and taking action on my 2 weeks off and finding properties, fixing them up.
That in itself is the biggest, I think, takeaway here for most, that there are a lot of people in the same boat as you right now of scaling their business. But if they all look back, it was at some point you had to take the action, right? You were not only listening and growing, but you actually took action to start growing a rental portfolio, flipping houses while still. Now you had a W-2 that was great for this. It's almost like it's even better than a teacher, right? That gets the entire summer off that can do this. You were actually having 2 weeks at a time, 2 weeks every month to operate in your backyard or somewhere else, growing your real estate portfolio. Love to hear that. Now, when we first met, when you first applied to the Collective Genius, I remember this. There's very few W-2 applicants that have a real estate investing business that I say yes to. The exceptions that are made are those that have been with a W-2 for a very long time and have a very flexible schedule and have a plan. I am going to go full-time within X amount of time frame. You were one of those. You started at our select level group. At what point did you know, all right, I'm probably a year or two away from going full-time in this? When did it really start to take off for you?
Yeah, and I'll give you 2 parts of that story. Initially, I was working that schedule we were talking about, 2 on, 2 off, buying properties, buying rentals, fixing stuff up. And I had this other cool superpower where I was super bankable, right? I had experience, right? The small banks, and I took the time to build a relationship with small banks, which is a huge tip I give everybody, right? Go deep with those folks, right? So I was doing that, but I had that W-2 income and they loved that, right? And I had a track record. So I was doing that and I was building it. And where I thought I was ready to leave was we were living in Midland, Texas at the time, actually, so I could be working and seeing the family every day and still be out in the field. But then we moved to South Lake, right outside of DFW, and really nice area, right? Great schools. And I thought that was a time I was ready to leave my W-2 and I was going to do full-time real estate. Well, realized that we didn't have it all quite figured out yet. We were doing the burst strategy and we're doing it well. But then we figured, all right, let's go do some fix and flips at some higher end price points, more in the Dallas area. Cause we've been doing really well in like the Fort Worth area and doing the burst strategy, working really well. But when we went to the high price point, all of a sudden we had tough contractors or different contractors. And we hit a little bit of seasonality. We were using private money and hard money. And all of a sudden, like things didn't sell and we got in a bad spot. And ultimately, fortunately, I had another business I was able to liquidate and sell and get out of these things. And and basically live to fight another day. So we were able to get out, pay everybody back, learn some super valuable lessons. And I kind of had to restart at that point. Actually, at that point, I moved back to Houston to work the office job to kind of get my feet back under me, but kind of kept the real estate. I didn't give up at that point.
So this is super important to not gloss over. Almost everyone that's been on the pod so far had this moment where at that point they could just go back to the W-2 and just live that life, or they can take those valuable lessons and actually apply them for the future growth of their own business. I know the end of this story and where we're at this moment. So clearly you didn't give up at that point. So what's the second part of it? You are now in Houston, back in the office. Now what are you doing?
Yep. I think a big part of it was, the cat was out of the bag, right? I had already been seeing what was possible in real estate, and I was working at a big corporate company where no matter what you did, your ceiling was here, right? And
sure,
no matter how hard I pushed, and Shell was one of the most corporate, like red tape, hard to get things done companies you're ever going to see. So anyway, I was ruined as a W-2 employee. So I kept that vision, right? And I went back, and luckily I was able to basically, we'll call it escape from Fort Worth, get out of that. I kept my Wyoming assets, right? And here's another thing I realized at the time is I was comparing my numbers in DFW, and I was comparing it to what I was seeing in Wyoming. And I'm like, oh, wow, I've got something here. So I basically doubled down, went all in on that. And yeah, I just kept working the W-2. I eventually ended up going out. Well, this is another part of the story, right? So oil and gas was getting extremely volatile at this time. Like they were literally every year they were like cutting 10% of our company, like 10%, like, hey, layoffs every year. One year they laid off 40% of our entire unit, right? So 40% of us got laid off, and I was part of one of the jobs that went away, and we had to reapply for everything. And this was also during COVID, right? This was right when COVID hit. So we were locked down. It was kind of cool because we didn't have to do anything because we were all reposting for our jobs. So my old role was like dissolved. So I had this like little window of like 3 or 4 months where I didn't have anything to do and we're locked down. So that was another time when like a pivotal moment where I read a book called 4 Hour Work Week and learned about VAs and learned about maximizing your time. And that's when I kind of leveraged what I'd learned at Shell about like processes and like SOPs. And I took that time because I was in Houston, right? And I still kept a couple rentals in Fort Worth, and then the rest of them were Wyoming, right? So I had this portfolio that I'm managing from Houston. And I'm like, I had this light bulb moment of like, if I can do this myself from Houston, why can't I train a virtual assistant how to do it? So that's exactly what I did is while we're locked down during COVID, no work to do, I'm like, I'm going to build out an entire system and write everything out and train a VA how to do this. And that was one of the first things I did is I built that business out, right? And then to kind of keep the story going is I realized that, hey, I've got this W-2 that I can lean on, and I've got a flexible schedule with my W-2. I actually, Leon, I milked, for lack of a better word, I milked it as long as I could, because if I could keep growing and building out different parts of my business, like why would I not?
I've said that across the board to everyone that I know that has ever applied that has a real estate investing business, but is still a W-2, is as long as the opportunity is allowed, like, and you're still doing high level work at your, W-2, and you still have, the ability to grow, stay bankable for as long as you can until it doesn't make any sense. And typically you'll know when the time is right, whether that's an event, a black swan event like COVID or layoffs, what have you. The jumping point will just appear to you, and obviously it did for you. Well, what's interesting? There's 2 things that I took from what you said there that I want to make sure I touch on. Number one is, isn't it fun to go through this and remember things? Because as you're telling the story, you're like, oh, I've totally forgot about I had to do this, and I totally forgot about. That's what I love about this pod, is that as an entrepreneur, you go back and you meant, oh, that was a pivotal moment for me. Or you hear it and you go, man, I should do that or more of that now. And maybe I got away from it. I've had plenty of those moments on the pod. The other thing is what you said specifically about process. This has not come out, and I did not want to gloss over this. This has not come out for all of the investors that are members of the Collective Genius that have been on this pod. Not one time has that member said, what I learned in corporate really helped me develop my SOPs and my processes, all the things that big corporations use that most of us leave for. Like, oh man, all those systems and processes and meetings and all that stuff. Well, guess what? You can't scale a business without it. I too came from the corporate world, and I remember that was my superpower out of the gates of starting in real estate. Is like I knew how to hire people, I knew how to train people, I knew how to interview. I mean, I'm not sitting here saying I was perfect at any of those, but I had tons. I had 11 years of experience doing it, and I immediately fell in line with what I knew, and I applied it with, all right, let me learn real estate, but I'm not going to take away from the foundation that was built that I knew how to build out proper systems, org charts, how to build culture. I knew all of those things. So if you're listening to this right now and you're someone that's looking to jump into real estate, or you're someone that is currently in real estate and you're going, man, I just can't build this out. If you've ever been in a corporate structure, a manager, you already have the knowledge. You already have it. Utilize that information that you've gained and that you paid your dues working for corporate all those years to bring more of structure to your business, specifically if you're looking to scale. And if you're listening to this, you're more than likely wanting to scale your business. So you build out all of these things. I meet you. You've got a significant portfolio. You're doing a ton of business at the time, I remember. And I remember halfway through that conversation, I don't think I knew that you were still in a W-2, because you were speaking to me as if you were doing this full time, which a lot of time was spent on this business. At what point, I know you were a Collective Genius member and then eventually left. At what point did you know, and what year was that?
Yeah, it's a good story. I don't even know if you know it, Leon. It was right shortly after I had met Leon. It was joining Collective Genius. So to your point, I'd been building out these different systems. I had one of the best gigs before I left. And that's why I was going to keep it as long as I could, where I would go into the office for 3 weeks straight, work a 12-hour shift. But the office was like 5 minutes from my house here. So I go in there and I work a 12-hour shift, and then I'd still have 21 days off. So I had the blessing of the field, but I didn't have to be in the field. And here's the other kicker, is we were just monitoring wells in the Gulf of Mexico. And it was a lot of downtime. And most of the other guys, most of my other peers they're sitting there watching YouTube or scrolling, and like, who knows what they're doing, sleeping. But I was like, this is my time to build my business, right? So I was literally getting as much done on my on days as was my off. So I had this amazing job, and I'm getting paid a salary. And it was great. I'm like, I'm going to ride this out. This is a funny story too, Leon. I remember when I took that job, my other peers were like, why are you taking that job, Casey? Like, all the people that go there, that's like career suicide. Like, those guys all go and that's where they end their career. And I'm like, exactly. That's where I want to go. And I want to keep building my other business. This is my off ramps to where I can keep building this up to where I've got all the systems built and I'm ready to leave.
You just had a different vision, right? You had more entrepreneur than they did. They're probably still, in a corporate setting, and it doesn't mean it's wrong. You just had a different plan for your life. So what year was it that you went full time?
You bet. So I got this really cool gig, but here's the kicker, and you'll appreciate this. I was working 2 p.m. to 2 a.m. So that 12 hours, I was missing all my kids' stuff, right? So I would go to work before they're home from school, and then I'd come home at 2 a.m. and then sleep in, and I don't see my kids, right? And I kept having it. That was this worked when my kids were younger, but now they're getting older and they're getting into sports. And I was missing all those games. And I'll never forget this. It was after I was on my off days and was coaching my son, and I was about to go back on. I'm like, I'm so tired of having to miss these games for this job, right? And I had built it up big enough to where I could leave it at that point. But it was one of the best gigs you could ever have, and the most secure deals I could do, right? So I remember, I'll never forget, I had my conversation with my wife. I'm like, I'm not, and I always have read this in books, but I try to keep this perspective. I'm like, when I'm on my deathbed, I don't want to look back and be like, I'm so happy I played it safe those last couple of years, and knowing that I missed all those games and all those moments with the kids. It was like, at that point, I had ultimate perfect clarity, and I'm like, I'm not going to miss anymore. And I basically just kind of try to adjust. I tried to communicate it with my boss that I'm not going to miss it, and they didn't accommodate. And so I just did it anyway. And I ultimately ran off from the job because I'm like, I'm not going to sacrifice this, but I'm going to keep this going until you make me leave.
All right. So you are working a W-2 still. You're just about to leave that. You have a remote business. There are some lessons, obviously, I'm sure, that you had to learn along the way before you left. How do you make this work? You're W-2. You're growing a remote business. How is all this working? There's got to be some lessons that you can share here.
Yeah, I think, again, I meant back to like we're using VAs. I was leveraging, like, I just realized you could do a lot long distance, right? But I grew up in Wyoming, right? So I knew the market, and I don't, again, so let's say this. I do not recommend somebody just picks up and goes and picks a dot on the map and like, I'm going to pick that market and I'm going to go it because I heard it's a good one, right? You could do that, but you better go find the right boots on the ground people. Because I had my unfair advantage was I knew Wyoming. I grew up there. I knew how the people operated. I always joke about this, but Wyoming's like 20 years behind the rest of the country, right? And that's why some people love it. Okay. But I knew how it worked up there. I had spent years living there, and even I'd spent weeks on, like 2 weeks off up there, like rehabbing houses. So I had the connections. I had the subcontractors. I built out my own construction company actually over the years as well, which we haven't really talked about, but I was able to build all these teams, right? And then, so built direct to seller, built that system, which can totally be done virtually, right? Built property management virtually. But I think here's the catalyst, I think, Leon, and what you're getting at is one of the most risky part is the contractors. And if I could nail down and have a good network of contractors, those guys could save me in so many ways. They could go check on my rentals and fix that stuff. They could go, like, I could lean on them to do my fix and flips. But if I had those guys and I had the right ones in place, I think that's one of the biggest ones. That combined with having good local market agents, right? We actually have our local market agents do all of our, they're the ones that go on all of our appointments, right? And they get all my listings. And that's what allows me to do work in all these different parts of Wyoming here from Houston is I know the local good agent and I give them enough volume to where they're my boots on the ground and they're 100% commission.
What was the secret? I mean, so people listening to this are going to say, yeah, that sounds easy. Or it doesn't sound easy to me. So how do you go about finding good contractors in an area? You might know it. You might be from there. What's the secret to finding good agents and good contractors? Because most people think those two things are oxymorons.
Yes. It is. The quick answer is not fast, right? This is a long game that I did over time. Yep. So it was time and it was scale, I think, right? And having a vision. I mean, I know early on when I was first starting to wholesale, like I was talking to guys that I went to college with. I remember one guy in particular, I was having a conversation like, hey, this is what I want to do. I'm doing all this marketing. But if you're a wholesaler or you're doing deals or you're going direct to seller, you do have something very valuable for these agents, right? You have deal flow, right? And if you leverage those connections the right way, it is super powerful. And then it just starts to compound. But as far as the first couple of them, I'd say that the cheat code is like going direct to seller and having lead flow and then but you got to find that right contact, that right agent that gets it and understands the value that he is bringing, that he's going to get a bunch of listings, right? He's going to get to list all your flips. Like we give a lot of our deals that aren't even like most other investors will take like a referral fee, but I don't even worry about that. It's like, these guys are going to do so much and help me out in so many other ways. Like there's some deals that I just purely can't help with the seller. I just kick over to the agent, right? But I found the right people and I asked them the right questions and I made sure that those agents had a long looking, like they were in there for the long haul, right? Because if you get a short-minded agent, they're going to go look at 15 properties for you and be like, Casey, what the hell? Like I've spent all this time and I made nothing.
For nothing. That's right.
Yes. And that's how it all starts, right?
How do you get them over that hump though? I mean, because that's the reality. People listening to this right now say, man, I can't find an agent that'll do that for me. How do you find someone with a long-term vision that is shared with you?
Yeah. It's who you're talking to, right? They are out there and you might have to just keep talking, like just like local, like banks, they say, go talk to 10 different banks, go talk to 10 different agents, find that person and set that expectation. That's the tip I would say is say, hey, you're probably going to look at a bunch of deals and there's going to be some time before this happens, right? So that's the first one. But once you get that first guy on board, now I have one that I can refer to the other one, right? And now I've got 3 or 4. And I leverage that to be like, hey, so if I go into a new market now, I'm like, hey, this is the expectations. But if you have questions, go talk to this other agent who's been doing it and he can give you his perspective. Because I think that was way more powerful for these agents to buy in and understand. And even when they would get frustrated, they'd be like, they could call him and be like, yeah, I went through the same thing, but eventually it comes around and it's worth your time.
So I said that we would circle back to how you got into other asset classes. You make that jump into full time. How many years had you been working on building, your knowledge in single family until you jumped into multifamily? And how did those opportunities present themselves?
You bet. I think for me, it was all in our deal flow, right? I was doing a lot of marketing, right? And we were getting single family. I mean, I was always looking at like small multifamily. I think like a lot of other people, if you're doing marketing, you see duplexes, 4 units, 3 units, right? And I started hearing about the numbers and other people who were being successful, but it was just a really natural organic growth, right? Like was doing some 4plexes. And then my first bigger one was just a 14 unit, right? But it was one of the best deals I still have today that I found. And I found this deal it was just the same marketing. You know what? It was when I was starting to do, and this is probably the hack, right? Is when I was trying to build my dispo or my buyers list, right? And by doing that, we actually had an agent reach out to me. She's like, hey, I got this 14 unit and I want to sell it. And I'm like, awesome. Let's look at the numbers. So anyway, so I bought that one. And then the next big jump was I went from 14 to a 63. But again, this was just a lead that came through our direct mail. But once you're underwriting all these single family deals and even small multifamily, like it's just more units and it's kind of the similar math. So when I saw that one, I was like, holy cow, like it takes me this long to fix and flip all these little houses. I can go get this because this multifamily value add we did, this was 2 years ago. It was 63 units. And we were buying them at like $50,000 a door, and we were going to put around 20,000 into them, but they were going to appraise for like 100. I'm like, these are great numbers for a fix and flip, and I'm going to go do it at scale, all in one building. So when I remember underwriting that deal, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a home run. And yeah, and that point, like my biggest blocker, I'd say, Leon, I was like, the math is there, let's do it. But I went down to the bank. I was actually just telling the story today. I went down to the bank that I've been doing deals with, had a relationship, right? I'm extremely bankable. Did I still have my W? No, I didn't have my W-2. But either way, I'm like still very bankable, a lot of experience. And they're like, Casey, we don't do speculative investments. Like our board is not in favor of that. I'm like, what is speculative about this? You will do this all day on a single family, right? Now there's more units. And anyway, I wanted to argue with him, but I didn't argue. I'm like, okay, I went and got a cosigner, right? So that's the other way that kind of helped me get into larger multifamily was I went and got a partner who had a much bigger balance sheet, and we took down that deal. And I had to give up a little bit more, but I built my track record.
You answered the question, my follow-up, which is, did you have a mentor in this? And I want to make sure that I get across 2 things here. Number one, jumping into 63 from 14, those 6 to 14, 6 to 20, there's not a lot of difference from doing, quads and triplexes. As you start to get into 50 plus, we're talking about, yes, it may look great on paper, but having a mentor to walk you, because you don't know what you don't know. And yes, it could be as easy as, it's just like doing, 60 some odd flips. But when you're at scale, those numbers can go south really quickly. And having someone, if you want to make this jump, just make sure, like in anything that you do, that you're talking to people like what we have in a community like ours. You're talking to people that have already done it, so you know what you should be on the lookout for. That's one. Number two, when you are bankable and you have banking relationships, maybe you have one and you have a great relationship, you should keep that relationship. But the other thing that you should be doing, I don't care if you're doing single family, multifamily, any type of development, you should have multiple local bank relationships. And here's why. After all the banks that I've met with in my career and built some really good relationships, the easiest thing to ask a local bank is, what is it that you and your board are aggressive at lending and that you're looking to grow more in your tranches of assets that you lend on. And they will all tell you, especially if you have a good relationship with your salesperson. Generally, that salesperson has a quota, just like any other sales business, of assets that they need to lend on because they can't make money unless they lend. Almost every bank will tell you, hey, Leon, we're really hot right now on commercial assets, specifically mixed use. And they'll tell you down to their number one and number two asset classes that they want to go off. They'll say, hey, I'm full with single family right now. It's not something that we really want to look at based upon your relationship. I might, have the ability to get something through. But Leon, anything you have for me that comes across multifamily, I'll take it. So it's very important that you have those conversations. Even if you don't have an asset right now, start calling out or start meeting with local bankers because they have quotas just like anyone else to lend money to local businesses like you. And I'm guessing, Casey, not only did you find, a co-signer for this particular one, but I'm guessing that forced your hand to go out and make some other banking relationships. And eventually the other part of this, which is you started raising your own capital.
Yes. And just to add to that point, I mean, not only do it to figure out what different banks are doing. And yeah, I mean, I do the exact same thing. Like if I'm going out, if I do this almost multiple times per year, probably, but at least yearly, right? When I'm looking, like I'll have a bunch of projects I'm ready to do and I'll reach out to 4 or 5 different banks at least, right? And I'll send them all my financials. And that way, everybody's pulling my credit at once and doing it all in a bulk. And that way I'll get terms from everybody, right? But it's also some of the same banks that I've been working with, but I'll always introduce more. But you can never have enough of these relationships. And yeah, to Leon's point, like every bank's board is different and changes over time, right? So you got to have a bunch of these guys in your pocket because if you want to be doing deals and doing volume and be able to find the right terms when you find that right deal, you've got to have multiple options.
Absolutely. And the next part of that is obviously you may have commercial assets with one bank, single family with another, mixed use over here, self-storage. You may have 10 banks that have 10 different assets as you continue to grow your assets. But even then, you still need to do the next part, which Casey, you've raised a lot of capital here in the last few years, especially. When you started to get these multifamily, that's when I'm guessing you said, okay, I need the ability to have my own fund to go out and fund these deals that we're starting to get coming to us.
Yeah, and it's about the time I joined CG, right? So this was 2 years ago when I bought this one. I remember talking to guys like Pete Kavanaugh and introductions you made for me and figuring out how they were raising money because this was actually the first big raise, right? Was this deal. I knew I had to go raise the equity for it. I tried to get these guys to seller finance it, but it just wasn't going to work. So I needed to have the cash and equity into it. So I'd actually gone through and got my fund all set up, went through all the securities thing. But this is such a good tip for people first starting out is I had headwinds, right? I'd been raising private money for years on my fix and flips, right? I had guys that would go fund first or second position on my fix and flips. And I had a decent little network of that. But I didn't have a bunch of guys who were used to coming and putting money on like a long-term basis, right? And like in the fund model. And that was a completely different model. And I didn't have a track record of that. Again, I was going from 14 up to 63, right? So when I was going out and raising money for this, I had my fund docs all set up, right? And I'm trying to close this deal and I'm getting really good feedback, right? People are like, oh, wow, I like what you're doing. I like your business model. But ultimately, I was struggling to actually get people to sign on the dotted line and make soft commitments to this deal. And what I found was, and I was like, man, what's going on? And it was just getting stressed. But what I found was they hadn't, some of these people were new, and then B, I didn't have that track record. So what I did is, luckily I was able to find one partner on it. He was the same guy that co-signed, right? And he had a bigger balance sheet than I did, which helped on the bank side. He also brought some of the equity to the deal. And we were able to take down that deal. And I could share that. We split it 50-50, which in most times I probably, for how much I was bringing to the deal, would not have given up that much. But on this deal, I'm like, that's fine. I'm going to go do this deal. And what I was like, so here's the key tip. So what I did, and I've presented on this before, is I was like, okay, I pitched that to all these different people, right? And I got them all in my CRM. I'm like, I'm going to show all these people, and not like vindictive, but like I'm going to show them what they missed out on, right? And I documented every part of that process. So from like how it went from under the rehab to like the due diligence, like anyway, I just kept them on my list and did everything. And then so I did that. And then the second thing was I kept getting people, as I got people interested, I found it was much more effective to raise money to get them some quick wins, right? You guys talk about this, like get them into like a fix and flip and pay them monthly so they get that check coming in every month. I know you guys talk about that. So I did that exact playbook, right? I got them in, started paying them, building more trust. So then when I went to raise a year later, I had more people that I've been doing deals with. They'd been getting checks every month from me. I now could show them this big case study. And so when I went to do that a year later, which was about 12 months from now, so last May, I was able to raise about 1.7 million for a 45 unit value add, and it was much easier.
Of course, you had the part of that that's so smart is that you didn't have the experience, and then you showed people the experience. As you said, it wasn't, I'll show you. It was, no, I'm literally going to show you that I'm capable of doing this in a positive way, so you see what I'm doing and have more interest on the next project, because now it's the fear, it's the FOMO, right? I can't miss out on this next deal. I want to be a part of it. You joined Collective Genius, I want to say 4 years ago.
About three years ago. Yeah.
3 years ago. You are one of roughly 40 members that came into our select level group and have promoted up. I love when members are growing. It's what what the community is about. You are a big go-giver within this community. I always say that when people are giving back to this community, those are the ones typically growing the most, or the ones that give the most. In the time frame that you've been here, you have, as I mentioned, given a lot. Is there one give that you've received that stands out, that has accelerated your business as a whole? Is there one or two that stand out to you?
Man, there are a lot. I could name several of them. I'm thinking about like advice about creating more active income and creating more. You know what? That's one of my favorite ones, and I've heard it across from many, many people, from some of the guys that have lived through 2008 and seen and have all those battle scars about having liquidity and not growing. Because to your point, like you hear a lot of people, and when I was first listening to podcasts, right, it was like buy assets, buy rentals, buy as many you can, create all this passive income. And that was kind of my mindset, was blow up my portfolio, create as much passive income so I could leave my job, right? But when I came to CG, I realized you need to, that's a part of it, but you need to create as much active income as you can, right? And that was one of the biggest lessons I learned is, and I try to tell this to people too, it's like, focus right now on your active income, create that, right? And have that feed your rentals, and that's how you can grow sustainably. And honestly, if I probably wouldn't have got that, I potentially could have just kept growing at a not sustainable path.
The reason that we push that so much is we have seen it over the years. Those that are gobbling up assets and not focused on active income, when any type of change in the market, those are the people typically that are struggling the most and having to sell off everything or a lot of what they've been building over the years because they haven't figured out predictable revenue. The quickest way to passive income is a very active income, very high level active income. And it gets lost. You were not focused on active income as you were building your assets because you had active income. You had a W-2, you had a high paying W-2 with time off to build it. So it wasn't something on your radar at that time. But when you went full time, you realized, man, I've got payroll, I have advertising expenses, I have all of these things that go into growing a business. Well, your assets do not pay that. They build long-term wealth, but active income is ultimately what will help you grow more wealth. For instance, the market isn't what it was in 2020 and 21. 22 has started to normalize, and we're seeing more of that across the board, across the U.S. As we enter into the summer of 25. Days on market have gone up, not significantly. We have seen more normal activity when it comes to markets across the board. Some are still crushing, but obviously it's not the same as it was in 2020 and 2021. the best way to ride that or weather a storm of any type that's coming is having a massive active income that you can take advantage of those that didn't, because you can pounce on those things that they have to have active income come in because they weren't good stewards of the business. And I think that's something that we tried to really preach early on and often, because, even the biggest, investors in this group could always use more active income just in case things do change. Outside of the growth that you've had and you've seen in this, obviously you have to put in the work. You give the value and you put the work in when you receive. Is there something that if somebody were asking you, the secret to my success, your superpower, you mentioned one earlier, what would you say your largest superpower is?
Man, I'll probably go with, and it's one I didn't have the self-realization to realize I had it until I became an entrepreneur and started negotiating and doing deals. And again, I'll go back to when I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad for the first time. I remember he talks about selling like door-to-door sales. And I don't know what he was talking about, Rich Dad was, but he's talking about doing that. And at that time, I'm like, oh man, I'm an engineer. I never learned that. I was like, I wish I knew that skill. I don't feel like I'm good at sales, right? And I was an engineer, so I wasn't getting a whole lot of reps at it. And so I thought that at that time I wasn't good at sales. But we actually didn't talk about this today, but we owned some franchises for a while. And that was probably where I first learned sales. Is I owned a Pure Bar franchise, and we opened it up and it was like sink or swim, right? You just had to perform and you had to learn how to sell. But as I got into it, I realized, hey, I actually do enjoy this. I'm good at solving problems critically, and just being able to sometimes it'll drive my wife crazy, and it probably drove my parents crazy. And now I get it because my kids don't say no. But I think it's the sales. I'm the long-winded way of saying I love sales, right? I love getting on the phone and closing, and I love solving problems, right? So now I've got a team of acquisitions people, but I still love being able to get on there, think creatively, solve the problem, and then and ultimately when the bigger problems come up that my acquisition guys can't solve, being able to hop on that call and ultimately jump in there and start troubleshooting and figure out a solution that helps my seller and helps us monetize. And that's probably my favorite part.
You're going to be good at anything, and especially your superpower. That's a really good one to have. Is there something that you're really excited about that you're working on right now you would like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple things. We're doing our first, back to the fundraising thing. And this is something I haven't shared with you, Leon, but I had to make a decision when I raised my fund. Am I going to go accredited or non-accredited? Like, that's kind of your decision, right? So I went with the accredited fund, so you could do marketing, and that's a little, I think, a better way to scale, right? And really build a business of raising capital, right? But when you do that, you sort of pigeon your hole with accredited investors, which is good and bad. But the only, call it, negative part is I still have a lot of people reach out that I want to help with. Because one of my goals, Leon, is to help as many families achieve financial freedom like I was able to, right? I told you guys my story about how I was able to make that decision and leave my W-2 so I could be there for my kids' games and be there for what mattered, right? But most of the other people in my industry and other industries aren't in that position. So that's one of my really true core goals, is to help more people do that, right? So, but to help people do that, I haven't had a way to help unaccredited people invest. They could go be like a lender on a deal. But even sometimes being a lender, you got to put up 50 to 100K to really actually be able to take down a deal. And that's probably the minimum. If you're going to be a first position lender on most houses, you're looking at 100 to 200K, right? So I was trying to figure out, how do I work and help with more people? So the one I recently found was, it's this platform called Fractional, where we were creating this fractional offering where multiple investors can come in. They're actually partners, right? Or they're on the LLC agreement. They're active members, right? So this is how you make sure that you're SEC compliant. So you can go up to 100 people in this, unaccredited or accredited, it doesn't matter, but they're actual owners of the company, right? So this is something we're actually launching right now, where I'm raising $1 million to keep doing my strategy of fix and flip and buy and hold. We're actually got a 2-year horizon on this thing. But I'm excited because now all those people that, all those families that I want to help get going, that they aren't quite ready to go buy their own property, right? But they've seen the power of real estate. I'm really excited that now those people can come in and actually partner with me on this deal. And the last cool part about it, Leon, is we've talked about track record and building like building that over the years, right? Building it with small banks. You want to build it with we talked about when you want to raise private money, how important your track record is, but it's like chicken before the egg, right? How do you get a track record if you haven't done it?
Sure.
So with the cool thing about this offering is because all these people who will partner on us, they're actually owners, right? So we're actually opening up, like, I'm going to do all the marketing for my company anyway. So what they're going to be able to do is say, hey, I was part of this deal, right? They're going to get the marketing collateral, and they're going to be able to actually say they partnered on this deal and start to build out their track record, right? Like I've got mine that I track every deal, right? I've got 125 going right now that I track with closing statements, photos, like testimonials, everything. That way, if like an investor wants to do his due diligence, I want to make it as easy as I can. But long-winded way of saying I'm excited to give that opportunity to other people so they can do this and now they can go to their next deal.
Love it. Document. I love that message as you're growing into these new asset classes. Like you didn't have the experience, but you made sure you documented all the experience that you were gaining. That's such a valuable lesson to share. The last one I have for you here, as someone with a young family, I know that in coaching, just like myself, I know that's important to you. For all of those investors, give me that early on, the journey of balance, right? You had really young kids when you were first starting this out, and your kids are still young, but you now have more time for them. How did you balance that, and what did it look like when you started, and what does it look like now?
Yeah, man, it's changed this day to day. It's a constant battle, right? And that's another thing I learned in CG from some of the leadership. I'm like, because when I first came in, I'm like, I left my W-2 to have more time with my family, and now I'm still hustling, and it's just a balance. And that's one of my favorite quotes from Jason is like, there's no such thing as balance right now in your life. And it's your stage in life. Like it's going to be up and down. And even talking to guys like Jimmy and like picking his brain, like, how do you do this? You've got kids. So I think that's been really helpful for me in CG is these other dads I also have the same values that I do, seeing how they manage it. But what I've learned from them is, hey, the balance is not going to be perfect. You're just going to have to, there's going to be, I've also called it seasons of life, right? Where there's seasons where it's like all out. You've got to go deliver, right? We're entrepreneurs, right? But yeah, I've just learned that to know that it's going to be seasonal. And I think the last thing is, Leon, I've just gotten better over the years at like time blocking and being like, hey, if I take the time on Sunday to really build this out and really get more effective in what I'm doing, then I can carve out what's going to be most important and make sure I'm there for that stuff. And then I can go fill in the rest.
It's so good what you just shared with everyone. You shared multiple names of people that you've relied on, that you see the example. They're fathers just like you. They're husbands just like you. They are doing this business and telling you, hey, it's not always going to be perfect. There are going to be seasons for grind. There's going to be seasons for balance. There's just so many great examples in the room. And I'm going to share an awesome hack that was shared in one of our recent meetings. And we do this at every level. So if we have something that we learn at one level, we share it with everyone. And it was this. We all work off of either Microsoft or Google, most of us from a calendar standpoint, and there's color codes for everything. And one of the vulnerability exercises that we did is, in your calendar, open it up right now. And on that calendar, how many things all the things that you have scheduled, how many of those are personal? And if you don't have a spouse, if you don't have a family, how much of that is for you? How much of that is personal time, either balancing with your family or just your own time on that calendar, and color code it. If it's not, start today adding things and have a special color specifically for your family. And what you'll see is your calendar will become Skittles. It'll become Skittles colors. And ultimately when you have it on your calendar, it gets done. You're measuring it because it's important. And it also block out all those other things that could be scheduled in those times. And it's intentionality. We shared that with the select group, who obviously it's harder to, and when you're growing a business, it's really hard to have that balance. But if you're going to get some of that time back, time blocking to your point, specifically with your calendar, and putting a very, one color that you only use for your family time. I know that it helped me. I've always done it, but I got more intentional about putting more of it on the calendar.
Yeah,
just a little
and that
there to share.
Yeah, and I'm glad you did, Leon. And it's like, that's one of the things I look back, I wish I would have started doing sooner and been more diligent, right? Like, even if you're in that growth phase where it's like hard to have balance, if you develop that skill of planning it out and taking the time on a Sunday or whenever you do to block it out, as you mentioned, if you track it and you put it in there, you'll follow it. But it's so easy to not do it. And you feel like you're not being productive, but it's the most productive time planning.
Well, and you're a hard-charging entrepreneur. You're going to fill that time with something unless you block it, because once you block it, you go, I can't do anything at that given time. Sorry, I can't do this because I'm doing something else that I've already have on my calendar. So wanted to share that. I also want to share, you have a great social media that you've grown, presence that you've grown over the years. For those that, there's so much good that you shared here, Casey. For those that are interested in learning more about all that you do, as well as maybe even getting in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
You bet. I always say, whatever platform you guys use, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, whatever, I'm on all of them. You just spell my name, Casey Gregersen. If you just spell it with all the E's, you'll find me. And and also, if you guys go to my website, CaseyGregersen.com, you'll be able to go see some of our events on there. I didn't mention we're doing a 2-day face-to-face workshop with some of the people, like those families that I'm talking about. I want to help create financial freedom. We're doing a really cool 2-day workshop in July, which you'll be able to go check out. And then you can also go see a little bit more about that offering I mentioned for any investor, right? If you got 10,000 or 100,000.
Well, this has been another great journey, another great pod with a Collective Genius member. Casey, I thank you for your time. I know your time is valuable, and I appreciate you time blocking this time for us to share your journey with all of those out there. Thanks again, my friend.
You're welcome. It was an easy decision to put this one on the calendar. Thanks, Leon.
I appreciate you saying that, Casey. And if you would like to be in the room with members like Casey Gregersen, the best way to do that is go to our website, thecollectivegenius.com. There you will find an application. Fill that application out, and if it's a good fit for you and vice versa, we'll talk about where you would qualify for and what it takes to get into the room so you can continue to grow and scale your real estate investing business. And I appreciate all of the kind words for the pod. We're continuing to drop them every Tuesday. Wherever you get your podcast, we would love for you to continue to download, like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. If you know any entrepreneurs out there, real estate investors, would love for you to leave a review and share as much as you possibly can. Thanks to all that have done that to this date. We look forward to seeing you next week on another great CG podcast.
Are you ready to scale your real estate business? Visit thecollectivegenius.com, where real estate investors come to scale. Subscribe to the Collective Genius podcast and hit the bell icon to be notified when our next episode releases. And thanks for listening.